Hi, welcome to my no name channel. I'm Bruce Coleman, and this is the second in the spice trade, spice route video, and we're going to be finishing up today. We're going to talk about how the spice route developed, and about colonialism and what happens when it comes to Indonesia, well, to the Banda Islands, and how the Dutch secured their rule. We're going to look at the development of colonialism and the Dutch rule in Indonesia, and take us up to the end of the monopoly of the spice trade. And then that will be it for this one. Then we're going to go back and do history. I'm going to finish the history of anthropology, and then after that I'm going to come back to the spice route again, and we're going to finish talking up that. We're going to talk about the north of Indonesia, the north of the Malukus, up at Ternate and Tidore, and take a look at how that developed up there. Some interesting developments in that area that were going on at the same time this stuff was going on in Banda. So the Dutch were making sure that they had this whole area secured, and that will be the end of those then. So that's my first. This is a video of what anthropology is, things that some anthropologists do, things that I do, and I'm an anthropologist. And so I hope you enjoy the second part here. If you have any comments, leave them below. There's some links to books and some other resources. Those should be. And that's going to be it for today. I hope you enjoy the video, and see you next time. So the story of the spice, the Maluku Islands, or the Spice Islands as were called then. It's the story of spices, and it's the start of the European exploration and colonization. Empire building with conquest, greed, violence, diplomacy, the beginnings of globalization. So long before the term globalization came into vogue, the politics and finances of Europe were affected by the small group of islands way away from Europe and its wars and machinations, these small little islands. And so the story of the Malukus is a story of how the residents, kings, and traders of the Maluku Islands, the Banda Islands, schemed and finagled and traded loyalties in a desperate attempt to keep their freedom and their lives and make a living at the same time. Because while our history of the West tends to focus just on the rulers and the winners, these colonial subjects did not go willingly into the hands of the spice invaders, as I like to call them. For a while, they gave as good as they got. But eventually, the technology of the West, especially the Dutch, overwhelmed them. Cloves and nutmeg, along with mace, which comes from nutmeg, were only grown here, but their use was global. And as I said, the clove tree is indigenous to only 5 islands in the north of the Malukus, the twin islands of Ternate and Tidore, Moti, Machian, and Bacan. The nutmeg is only found in the islands Banda, Lontar, and Run. Well, it was back then. So the clove tree produces a seed that has a short life. The tree can grow up to 10 meters tall, and it produces buds that change in color through the maturation period. First they're green, then yellow and pink, and eventually a deep red. As the clove buds and stems dry out, they take the shape of nails. And so in Latin this is called clavus, and it means nail. The Indonesians call them cengkeh, which comes from the Fujian word shenka, which means scented nails. And so cloves were used for their flavor and their aroma. And so cloves have this powerful odor, and sailors could smell the cloves far out at sea. So they had many uses. They were used to darken eyebrows. They flavored food. Their aroma was supposed to be good for health. They had antibacterial and analgesic properties. They were used for toothaches. They're still used for toothaches. I was talking to a person on the cruise ship, said, oh yeah, they're still used for toothaches. Used for stomach aches, freshen the breath. There's a story that the Chinese were using cloves from at least the 3rd century BC, and the emperor during the Han Dynasty would not let people approach him, so goes the story, without having them first chew on some cloves to sweeten their breath. So they use this oil for toothaches and headaches. They can treat parasites with this. It's used for skins to treat wounds and other dermatological infections. And the Romans thought that the smell of cloves was a prophylactic against a variety of illnesses. And during the Middle Ages, cloves were used to help preserve meat, or at least cover up the smell of rotting meat. They were used as a room freshener as well, and called a Queen's Delight. Upper class ladies wore them around their neck to keep away illness and bad smells. Cloves were also used to enhance the taste of wine and grog, and they were used as a, let's not forget sex, they were used as an aphrodisiac as well, and as an aid in conception. And of course, they were also used to season food, like we do now. They're a big business. They're still a big business in Indonesia because they're used to make the Kretek cigarettes. Here's a Kretek cigarette pack. So these spices had many uses, and they were more valuable than gold. Profits from the sale of cloves could reach as high as 1,000%. So you understand why people took these perilous voyages and went through the wars and struggles, the killing, to get these. There's a lot of money in these spices. Now, the nutmeg also has many uses. Nutmeg is an apricot-like fruit, and the grated nut gives off a lovely aroma of nutmeg. Mace comes from the red outer covering of the seed. Nutmegs were used as breast fresheners to clear the eyes. Again, ease stomach aches. They help in the digestion of meat. And they were also thought to clear up liver and spleen ailments. And so the trade in these two magical and legendary spices started long before the age of exploration. The first traders were Austronesian sailors who brought cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg to India, somewhere around 300 years before BC. From India, trade followed the Arabian coastlines, often in short spurts, from one trading city to the next, stretching from the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea. These routes became the main part of what was known as the spice route, and which would be an important factor in the development of civilization over the next 1,000 years. The ancient city of Alexandria in Egypt was a center for economic and cultural activities. From Alexandria, the trade route for the cloves and nutmeg went down the Nile by boat, across the desert by caravan, and on through the Arab world by caravan and boat. So Chinese, Indians, Javanese, Bugis, Arab settlers, sailors, and traders took these spices from the Malukus and they moved them around the world. But the origins of the spices were clouded in mystery because of their remote location. Marco Polo found cloves in China, for example, and he believed that they were grown in the southwest of China. And that story was believed in Europe for some time. The first of the European powers to prosper from the spices were the Venetians. through their trade with Mediterranean ports like Antioch and Gaza and Alexandria. Venice, on the eve of the 15th century, had a powerful fleet of trading galleys and fighting ships, and their monopoly on the spice trade within Europe made them wealthy and powerful and drew the envy of other European countries, especially Portugal and Spain. If they wanted to find a sea route to India and the Spice Islands so that they could break the hold that Venice had on the spice trade, that Venice and the Arabs had on the spice trade. The Portuguese, in their attempt to outmaneuver the Venetians, had developed a new type of sailing ship, which was different from others in Europe at the time, the caravel, and this allowed them to sail far into the ocean, away from the coastline. They were looking for this direct route to India and the Spice Islands. They also had the astrolabe, the sextant, the quadrant, and compasses, which they had inherited from their years under Muslim rule. So they're able to go out and do these exploring. So in 1454, the Portuguese asked the Pope for the rights to all the land that they discovered up to India. And the Pope granted this wish and entreated them to spread Christianity along the way. King John II prepared the way by sending a spy to Arab ports searching for information on this route to the fabled Spice Islands. A long list of sailors, both Portuguese and Spanish, set off looking for this route. Among them was Christopher Columbus, Bartholomew Diaz, who was able to round the Cape of Good Hope. In 1494, after news of Columbus supposedly finding the route to India caused an uproar with the Portuguese, they accused the Spanish of breaking the papal decree, which gave them monopoly on all discoveries. A treaty was signed which split the world into half. Love this. For the two competing nations. So Spain was looking for a western route to the Indies. Portugal looking for an eastern route. And you can see here on the map the two different routes. So in 1498, Vasco da Gama finally reached India, where he met with the Hindu ruler of Calicut. And while he was able to eventually receive a letter from the ruler, Zamarin, informing the king of Portugal that he was willing to trade spices and other things for gold, valuable cloths, and other items. Da Gama, however, didn't make the best impression. He was laughed at because of the gifts that he gave to Zamarin, but he agreed anyway to take these gifts with the understanding that more and better ones would be coming in the next visit. And Da Gama made a hasty retreat because there were Muslim traders who were there, and they were unhappy that the Portuguese were making inroads. And so Da Gama heard that there was a plot to murder him, and he decided to get going while the going was good. King Manuel decided that the next expedition would be fitted out with the appropriate items, gifts, as well as a large military presence to demonstrate Portugal's impressive firepower. So in 1500, Pedro Cabral left Lisbon fully loaded with an armada of 13 ships and 1,300 men. Cabral was under orders to solidify a trading relationship with the Zamarin and to attack any ships that he found along the way, with the exception of the ones that were docked at Calicut. Well, the idea was to establish a land base in India and gain hegemony over the spice route. which had been open for everybody for thousands of years. So here come the Europeans, right? There's free trade going on. Europeans want to make a monopoly. So back in Calicut, Cabral set up a factory, and a factory is just like a trading center, and began trading for spices. But after 3 months, he wasn't able to fill his ships, and he blamed the Muslim traders for this, and he attacked and seized an Arab ship that was trying to leave port, and this set off rioting in the town. The Portuguese factory was burned down. A number of the Portuguese were killed or captured, and Cabral opened fire on the city and eventually forced Zamora to leave the city. Cabral continued on his way home then. He took off, seizing Arab ships, slaughtering their crews along the way after taking their cargo. Out of the original 13 ships that had set off from Lisbon, only 6 returned. Still, the expedition was considered a great success. In 1509, the Portuguese attacked Goa with the aid of the neighboring Hindu kingdom, who wanted to defeat the Muslim rulers of Goa and establish their own presence. And so Goa remained held by the Portuguese until 1961. And of course, if you were a traveler, you know Goa is a popular place for travelers, especially for the hippy-dippy travelers. And I say that as a former hippie. I say that with love. So this was one of those cases where the local king decided to take advantage of the European power in order to achieve his goals. And in this case, to develop a trading relationship with the Portuguese and to gain access to a seaport. So next, the Portuguese seized Malacca on the Malay Peninsula. And Malacca was a key trading center for Asia at this time. Now, the first attempt in 1509 ended in failure when Muslim traders notified the Sultan of the city about the atrocities that the Portuguese had committed in Goa and Calicut and on the sea. So the Portuguese lost many men and they fled, but they came back in 1511 with a large armada, and they were easily able to seize the city. Reportedly, they only fired one volley before the Sultan surrendered. So the Portuguese now had a base in Goa and control of the trade between Lisbon, India, China, and the Spice Islands through their control of Malacca. So shortly after, but now they still hadn't reached the Spice Islands, right? So they've got areas around here, but they still don't know where the Spice Islands are. So with the Portuguese in control of Goa and Malacca, they're set up in the area. And now in 1512, they set off for the Banda Islands. They've gotten local directions where the spices come from, and they take off to the island of Banda. They reach Banda in 1512 with orders to set up trading and to honor the local customs. Now remember, the Portuguese have a reputation of being barbarians at this time because of their slaughter of people along the way, especially Muslims, and so they're supposed to be good guys when they get there and set up trading. And they reached the Banda Islands in 1512, and so the search for the fabled Spice Islands comes to an end. The Europeans now know where it is. They've set up a trade, and it's done. This long search is finished. The Portuguese are in control right now of the situation, but this sets off a 300-year struggle for control of the Spice Islands between the Portuguese, the Spanish, the British, and of course the Dutch. And the struggle doesn't end until the defeat of Napoleon with an overview of the spice route and the search for the Spice Islands. Let's take a look at what's happening on the island of Banda. So in 1512, the Portuguese claimed the Banda Islands. They now have European control of the spice trade, it seems. But they weren't really interested in hanging out. There wasn't that much to do there. Banda Islands back in those days, and even now, like I said before, pretty much backwater. There wasn't much to do besides trade for spices, and the other trade goods that were around were available in more easily reached Ambon, which had a much larger selection of goods to trade for. The Portuguese did try to set up a fort in 1529, but they were rebuffed by locals who did not want them putting a permanent base in their territory. And so the Portuguese spent their time in Malacca. They didn't really press the issue. They could trade just as easily in Malacca as they could in Banda, which was much more difficult to do. So there's a vacuum, and like with vacuums, something comes in to fill it, and in this case it's the Dutch. And so in 1599, the Dutch arrive. Now the Dutch tried to persuade the Bandanese to forego their trading relationship with the Portuguese and others, but what the Dutch had to trade wasn't very interesting. It was heavy cloths, not suitable for the local environment, iron goods, other trinkets. They didn't really impress the Bandanese, and so they weren't really interested in setting up this sole trading relationship with the Dutch. However, Dutch weren't people to say take no for an answer, and so they pressured the Bandanese leadership, the chiefs, to accept a sole trading relationship. But well, these crafty Bandanese, they said one thing and they did the other. So in 1609, the Dutch returned with orders to build a fort and set up a permanent base in Banda. But the locals weren't really interested in this. They got used in Banda Neira to trading with lots of foreigners. This has been going on for 1,000 years or more. And so they were used to having foreigners around. They just didn't want them to stay. It was kind of like in Ubud, one of the special places in Bali for tourists. The book came out a few years ago called Eat, Pray, and Love, and then a movie after that, and a local local restaurateur put up a sign in his restaurant, Eat, Pay, Leave. Well, the Bandanese were the same. They wanted trading relationships. It is that they want these people to stay here. Come here, do your trading, and then leave. And so the Dutch are building Fort Nassau, but the locals aren't happy. And so in 1609, the Dutch, realizing that there were a lot of tensions on the island because locals were not happy with the fort building, the Dutch set up a meeting to try to work out the situation. However, the Bandanese had other things in mind, and so the Dutch were ambushed at this meeting. 42 Dutch soldiers and officials were killed, including the admiral. Unfortunately for the locals, one junior officer escaped, and he was to become the symbol of terror for the rest of his rule. And his name was Pieterszoon Coen, and he was to become the Governor General, eventually, of the Dutch East Indies. Coen was not a person to be trifled with. He spoke his mind, and he got what he wanted. He had clear ideas of what he wanted to do in as Governor General. After setting up the town of Batavia, he decided that it was time to go and settle scores in the Bandas. And so He arrived back in Bandas in 1621. So, unfortunately for the Bandanese, Coen came back to Banda in 1621 with 13 ships, 1,500 soldiers, intent on getting revenge for what happened in 1609. There were provocations on both sides, and eventually Coen attacked, burned down villages, captured, enslaved, or executed women, men, children. He exterminated the whole native population. These were used later, the slaves that were left that he did not kill were used as plantation workers. He set up a plantation system on the island. A few souls managed to escape up to the mountains, but they were eventually starved out. So Coen and the Dutch had complete control of the nutmeg trade, with one exception, the island of Run. There was a small British group in the island of Run, and they were a thorn in the side of the British. The Dutch attacked. The British held out for over 1,000 days, but eventually surrendered. They were allowed to leave. The ones that were left alive were allowed to leave. Unfortunately for the inhabitants of Run, they were all killed. And all the nutmeg trees were cut down, destroyed. So Dutch had a complete monopoly now of nutmeg, the nutmeg trade. And they killed off a significant part of the local populations. Well, the VOC now had control of the Banda Islands, and they set up this plantation system, and they used the Hongi Toktan system to maintain control. The Hongi Toktan system was a fleet of traditional ships called Kora, and you can see here's a new one, here's an old one. They still use these. They come out and welcome cruise ships when they come in. They're quite impressive. And these Kora would have 100 men in them, flags flying, drums beating, chanting. They were quite intimidating to everybody. And this was used to keep control of the situation should any resistance occur. So now they had complete control. They had this plantation system set up, and they used Dutch perkenniers. And gave a lecture one time on a ship, and there just happened to be a Dutch guy there. He said, "Oh, you're not pronouncing that correctly," and he helped me. Now that he's not here, I'll just take my pronunciation. So the Dutch perkenniers were there, and then these men built these opulent villas. Here's a photo of, not 300 years ago, 400 years ago, but this is a villa like this. And they used the profits from this new system. They married local women. Coen had asked the VOC to send over Dutch women because he said that male sex cannot exist without women. And he added that if good women couldn't be found, they could send some girls instead. Well, this didn't happen, and so the Dutch took local wives, and they either married them or took them on as concubines, and a new race of Indo-Europeans came into existence. The colonizing of Indonesia was underway. Now, the Dutch retained control of the Banda Islands until the Indonesian Revolution, with the exception of a short period during the Napoleonic Wars when the British returned and captured Banda Neira and held it for a while until the defeat of Napoleon and the Treaty of Paris in 1815. The British left with a supply of nutmegs. Now there's a couple of different stories on this, and they're interesting, but they vary. According to this story, the British, when they left, they took a supply of nutmeg trees with them, and they planted them in British colonies around Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, and that broke the monopoly. There's a different story, and if I get a chance, I'll get to it. It's interesting, but I'll leave a link to the book below. So, oh, and as a side note, the British kept their claim on Run, even though the Dutch controlled it, until 1667, the Treaty of Breda, when the British gave up their control of Run, or their claim to Run, to the Dutch in return for Manhattan. Yes, that's right, the island of Manhattan. Okay, and so there's more to the story of the Spice Islands and the spice route, but the scene shifts up to the north, up to Ternate and Tidore, and their cloves. And so I'm going to talk about that in the next video. Well, not the next video, but the next anthropology video. So that's it for today. Oh, one final word. I forgot to mention, because this is really a cool place, the Fort Belgica. So Fort Belgica was renovated in 1622, and then again in 1672, and the new design used the double pentagon shape. So there's a pentagon on the outside, a pentagon on the inside, and it had 5 towers, openings for cannons. The modified fort held 50 guns, and it could have 400 men, and it was surrendered to the British in 1795 without a shot being fired. It was returned to the Dutch in 1803 again, and then taken by the British again in 1810, and then back to the Dutch at the end of the Napoleonic Wars. So Fort Belgica has gone back and forth. And if you ever get a chance to visit Maluku Islands, and especially the Spice Islands, well, the islands down in the south, the Banda Islands, it's worth a visit to take a look at the fort. It's cool. The area around it is cool. They're doing some renovations there, so I haven't been there a couple of years, so I don't know what it looks like now. But yeah, here's a photo or two. And so that's it. Thanks for visiting. If you like this, subscribe. I think next video will be COVID-19 update, and then I'm trying to get another Singareja snippets. So have a good day, be safe, be kind to someone today.